Hello, everybody. Please join me in welcoming back to the stage director Liz Garbus. Liz, I got a couple of questions. How did you decide to make a movie about Jacques Cousteau, for starters?
Well, now it's the time where I get to embarrass my son, but my husband and I were reading, there's a series of books that detail historical figures. Who was Rosa Parks? Who was Gandhi? There's a book that was who is Jacques Cousteau? And we were reading this book about 6 or 7 years ago to my son, who was then still in the phase where one read books to them. And I realized in that moment while reading about this extraordinary life that this huge icon from my childhood, this hero, was being lost to a new generation, and that his message was so incredibly timely. His own evolution from adventurer to protector just felt to me like the metaphor of this moment, this metaphor that we all need to be, it's a metaphor for where our planet needs to go. And thinking about him in 1992 and in 1971 and the messages, and it being now 30 or 50 years later, just felt heartbreaking and important. And so that's how it all started.
And there's so much great archival footage of every sort in here. How did you get access to that? Can you talk a little about that?
Right, well, that's why it took so long to get to this point. After that initial idea and some reading and exploring and realizing that, in fact, no, there was really no film and that it was impossible to find those TV specials, and even in this age where everything's on YouTube, we contacted the Cousteau Society, which was run by his widow, Francine Cousteau, his second wife. And that turned into a very protracted, multi-year conversation. The Cousteau Society was very, very protective of the footage and dailies for understandable reasons. But ultimately, after years of perseverance in our partnership with Nat Geo, we were given the so-called keys to the kingdom, and actually were able to walk into that archive and all those outtakes, all the television shows, all the films, early films, all his early home movies, those journals. Ultimately, after years and years, we got access.
And how much footage was it when you got in there?
Well, there are there's thousands of hours of footage. We ended up working with about 500 to 600 hours of footage. We were guided by an archivist who worked at the Cousteau Society, thankfully, who knew where everything was, and so we were able to say, like, how about the early dive, the spearfisher. Like, he was able to help us find what we were thinking of in that huge ocean of footage.
What surprised you most about Cousteau as you made the film?
Well, so many things surprised me. I mean, I had no idea about his collaboration with Big Oil. That was shocking, and I think in a kind of a at that point, like in a modern mindset, it sort of was quite shocking. But I'd say my favorite happy surprise was the discovery of Simone Cousteau and her character and her poetry and her love for that vessel and the sea, it's never surprising, I think, but it's always wonderful to find that unknown woman alongside the heroic, famous man, she certainly delivered on that.
Indeed. Putting aside his environmental significance, what do you admire as a fellow filmmaker most about Cousteau and what he did?
His derision of documentary. No, what I relate to is his addiction to this medium, and how he says, I feel sick if I'm not making a film. I relate to that. I'm not able to not make films either. So, and of course, his desire to always push the boundaries and go deeper and further. I'm not an innovator in the same way, but just that desire to kind of constantly be pushing yourself into new places that might be uncomfortable, is something I'd really admire, yeah.
Like another film we have in the festival I love, The Real Charlie Chaplin, this is a portrayal of an incredible figure, but it's unflinching in the way he's presented. Was that a tough decision for you to make, to present him sort of warts and all?
You know, it's not a tough decision. I mean, I think there are those who will say, oh, you know, who don't want their heroes to have those blemishes on them. But for me, it just makes them more human and relatable. And, you know, to be Cousteau, to have made mistakes, of course, in his family and as environmental mistakes, and being able to look at them and talk about them and actually atone for them and make it his mission to spread the positive, you know, to spread the word about the environmental dangers, felt to me more heroic than were he just kind of a guy who always did things right. So that's what I look for in my films, ultimately.
Is there anyone in today's film or environmental world that that you think is sort of a modern-day Cousteau of sorts?
That's the problem. No. I mean, not talking about film, but environmental. I mean, the celebrity that Cousteau enjoyed, you know, the idea that he was, you know, the second most famous, you know, person that people wanted to meet, and the fact that he was talking about the environment, you know, there's nobody on that level. And of course, today it becomes partisan. And so, no, there's really nobody has been able to fill those shoes for reasons that are not the environmentalist fault, but because of our partisan, you know, the media environment we live in. But it is a reminder of how important this kind of work is, of course. Yeah.
We have time for a question or two from the audience, in case I see a hand right there on the aisle. Yes, you can just go ahead and shout.
I'm just curious, if you can elaborate a little bit on the absence of the younger son or the other son until, like, towards the end. This isn't part of that world. How did that, what happened? Was he involved?
Well, what's he up to is a question. I don't know if I agree that he's not part of the story. I mean, I think that the kids were in boarding school 10 months a year, and they were on the Calypso very rarely. So we actually used all the shots in those 500 hours of the kids on board that we found. So I think that was a matter of them being not very present, and the parents being really at sea while the kids were growing up on land, and also living with another family on the short vacations from boarding school. He took over at his father's side after his brother's death, and he continues to undertake undersea expeditions. There were, unfortunately, I'd say the last 2 decades, he has been locked in litigation against the second family, Francine Cousteau's family, for who controls the Cousteau name. So that has been sort of an ugly last chapter of their experiences. And, you know, it's having made films about famous figures before, you often find this. I mean, Marilyn Monroe is one example, but even Nina Simone, that there are these battles for control of that legacy, which really tear families apart. And this is certainly a situation where that happened.
Yes, a question there.
How did he survive the car accident? Who saved him that night?
Oh, that's a really good question. You know, I don't know that he wrote about that. I mean, he must have just, I don't know. That's a great question. I haven't been asked that before. I mean, I think he was probably picked up by another person and brought to the hospital, but he didn't write about how he got there. I'm sorry to not have a better answer.
Yes, right here. Hold on, we have a microphone that's about to be handed to you.
Thank you. Thank you. I'd just like to know, had Cousteau not signed up with the oil expedition company, would he have the financing to really undertake a change in
Had he not taken oil money, would he have? Well, I mean, he was an entrepreneur, and he was constantly looking for sources of money. And then, you know, that he got into this, you know, deal with the oil companies that sustained the Calypso for years. Would he have found another supporter had they not? I don't know. I mean, it's not. It's just a path that wasn't taken because they got that funding from BP and other sources.
Okay, right there. Thanks.
I don't know if I was mistaken when I saw it on the screen, but the narrator, Vincent Cassel, is that the actor?
Yes.
The French actor, and how did he get involved?
He got involved because I wrote his agent a letter and asked him to please, consider this. And certainly he, like many of us, grew up loving this man, so he said yes. So it was just that plain old ask and beg and hope and, yeah.
Well, Liz, thank you so much for making this wonderful film about Jacques Cousteau and for coming here to the festival with it.
Thank you for coming. Thanks.
Thank you, Liz. Thanks, everybody.